Yeah, okay, got it. Vidilma, top of government outlet. Vidilma. Okay, so there was some great markers around yeah, around the trees. So we're on government outlet at the very beginning, right? Okay. So maybe Tuma Migavai, the Tuma is on the inside of the field. Vilanas Migarai, and the trees are on the outside of the field, and therefore we don't know for sure that the area where that we don't know for sure that the grave has been plowed over. If there was a grave in the area, maybe they only plowed the area of the trees and not the rest of the field, and the tuma is somewhere in the rest of the field. So we say no, we're talking about where the trees of the field was interspersed with trees all over the place. That there was no like open area, so they plowed the entire field. So therefore, you could be comfortable to know that the field was plowed over, and therefore there wouldn't be any grave that would be intact that would convey Tumas by Zema. Or we can say alternatively, Ha'aman, Ein Machikin Sian Mimakam Tumash Lo Lahavsid Eretz Yisrael. We said a principle that we don't put the grave markers that far away from the place of Tuma. And since the grave markers are near the trees, so therefore we know that the grave must have been near the trees, and therefore it would have been plowed over. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, what did Rabbi Yehuda say? He said, you can't rely upon plowing alone until there's a zaken or an old man or a Talmid Chacham. It could be a young Talmid Chacham, like the new Rav of the Shtelt, who tells you that there is no longer any grave that's intact in the area. Because not everybody is so proficient to know when an area is tuma free. So Abaye Shema Mina, we see from here that if you're like the Rav in the town, that he's responsible for everything that goes on in the city, even things relating to graveyards and what areas are tummy and so forth. The new sheriff in town, whatever, a new young rabbi, he's responsible for everything. Yep. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Matzah Evan Mitzu Yenes Tachtea Tame. If you find a stone that has a mark on it, has like lime that's plastered on it, which would indicate that there is a grave there. So then Tachtea Tame. Then underneath it, our stone is generally elevated. So in this particular case, you don't have to have the grave marker a distance from where the grave actually is. If it's some people from a distance will be able to see the lime in the stone, and therefore they know the grave must be underneath the stone itself. Shtayim, if there are two such stones, if there's also lime between the two stones, so then not only underneath the stones are going to be tameh, but even between the two stones is tamei as well. But if there is no line between them, so then beinei and tahor, that only the areas underneath the stones that are marked with lime have graves under them, but otherwise between them would be tahor, would not be presumed to have graves between them. I mean, despite the fact that there was no plowing in between these two different stones, Tosos has the gears of the lake of Cheres. Even though there's no earthenware, we're not going to go with that girsa because we don't have the time. But it's a strange lashon. The apagav to lake choresh. You have to admit it's a strange lashon. So Rashi says that even that the girsa is like we have it, even though it hasn't been plowed, it's nonetheless going to be tahor. Vatanya, we don't have a brisa that says matzah even achas mitziyetzis taftea tamei. Similar to what we just said, if you have one stone with a lime on top, we assume that there's a grave underneath the stone. Shtayim, two stones, and yesh choresh b'nei and tahor. That if the area between them was plowed, so then the area is tahor. B'imla b'nei and tamei, right? That's what we just got. The if not, then the area between them are tamei. So Amar Papa. So Papa says no hacha. In this particular case, where we say that if there is no plowing between them, then it's going to be tamei, even though there is. So, and we say that the area between them is going to be tamei. Is hacha kishasid shapok aroshein. This is when the lime is poured on the top of the stones, and there is a little bit of a lime that is spread out thinly, lakan umuda, lakanu lakan, which kind of continues not the entire distance between the stones, but it continues a little bit of the way. So therefore, we say that that's indicative of the fact that maybe the reason why there's a runoff of the lime is that it was meant to demonstrate that there is a tuma in between. So if you have a situation where the area between was plowed, so you can assume that b'nei and tar, that really the area is tar, and the plow just happened to drag some of the lime so that it extends beyond the stone. The ema machmas korishu, the ikbo, that it got dragged, that it got peeled off from the original stone, and therefore it spread out a little bit into the area adjacent to the stone. Below, sita beni benihu, v'tamei. However, if there was no choresh, if there was no plowing, so then we're going to work with the assumption in that case that the reason, if there would be no sid, so then it's fine. But if there would be a little bit of sid, so then we assume that it was because it was deliberately placed there, the beni benihu, in order to indicate that the area in between is vitame would be tame. But if you had no sid, so then we would say that we would declare the area to be tahor in such a case. Okay, fine. So Amar Rav Asi. So Rav Asi says, Meitzer echad misuyanhu. If you have a field and there's one boundary where it's like an elevated boundary, and it's mitsuyan, meaning that there's like lime that is placed on top of that boundary, so you assume that since the grave can't be too far away, so that area is tamei and the rest of the field is tar. Shnaim, if two boundaries are so marked, haim tamein, so the area of those boundaries is tamei, and the rest of the field is tahor. Shlosha, you have three boundaries that are marked, those three boundary areas we assume are tamei, but the rest of the field is tar. But if you marked all four boundaries, so marking all four boundaries is an indication that you're bounding the entire area, because the entire area between all the boundaries is tamei, and that's why you mark the entire perimeter of the field. Abba hein tahorin. But in that particular case, we would assume that the tuma is a little bit further away from the boundaries. That's why you're sort of like highlighting this field as a problem. So you're highlighting the boundaries that surround it, but it's going to be a little bit of a distance from the tuma itself. And therefore the boundaries themselves, the area underneath the boundaries, will be presumed to be tahor. Because after all, we said, tuma, we generally don't place the tzion too far away from the makom tuma. So if it's only one or two or three of the boundaries, it means that the tumor is there in the boundaries, and only if the entire area is encircled with lime is it an indication on the field. And we go out also on Kol HaMoed to pull out any of the kilayim that has grown in the fields where there are forbidden mixtures of seeds in the fields. Is it really the case that we go out and Kol HaMoed in order to uproot the kilayim? But isn't that something that's done earlier? Because after all, we learned this is in we learned this in Maseches Megillah, right? To begin Rosh Chodesh Adar, we announced people should bring their shkolim, the maxis a shekel, to the Beis HaMikdash for the kabbanos of the next year that are due on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Kilayim, and we also announced that kilayim we have to check because the kilayim might start growing in the fields if there are forbidden mixtures. Chamisha Sabo, and just continuing what else goes on in Chodesh Adar. On the 15th day, Kohenis and Megillah B'Krachim, in any city which was encircled with a wall from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, we read the Megillah on the 15th day. We could have also said that any other city we read the Megillah on the 14th day. We're just kind of telling you things that go on in Adar. The Yotz in the Kavit says Darachim, and we go and we remove thorns from the roads. These are also things we do during Kol HaMoed. We understand that new thorns may have grown in the meantime. L'sakin and rechovos, and we fix the streets. So limud mikvos, and we measure the mikvos. So osin kot tzarchei rabim, and we do all the tzarchei rabim. Mitzayin is the kevaros, and we also place grave markers on the graves. So we could have asked on that, why are we doing that as well? Kol HaMoed. So some say, well, we're talking about where there were heavy rains, and therefore the lime, may have been washed off. V'yosin ala kilayim, but now we're focusing specifically on this clause that we go out previously. V'yosin ala kilayim, and we check out the kilayim. We made an announcement regarding the kilayim on the first day of Adar to watch out. On the 15th day, we go out and we see whether any of the kilayim have grown. So why do we have to do it again? If the kilayim were already uprooted, then presumably they didn't grow again between that time and the Chol HaMoed. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina give an answer. They say, well, there is the early crop, there's the late crop. So for the early crop, you went out earlier, but for the late crop, the kilayim might only be growing now. So you have to go out again now in order to uproot any kilayim that may be emerging from the late crop. The other one gave the answer, kan bizroim, kan biyarakos. So when you went out the first time, it was for grains. Grains grow more speedily, more early on. Kan biyarakos, when you're going out during, let's say, Chodesh Nisan, Chol HaMoed Pesach, that's for the yarakos, that's for the vegetables, those grow a little later. Rabbi Yassi and Rabbi Yochanan, Loshana L'Shenitza Nikar. All of these times that you would wait even until the 15th day of Adar to uproot the kilayim, that's only if it hasn't begun to sprout. Abal Nitza Nikar, but if you could see that the grains or the vegetables and so forth are already sprouting, so then Yotzin Alen, so then you go out even earlier than the 15th day of Adar. What's the special reason that we pick, particularly Chol HaMoed, for, let's say, the agents of the Bezdin to go out and to uproot the kilayim that they find? Some Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Skapula, the Musli Gaban, because they have to hire workers and it's cheaper labor because the costs are coming from the Beis HaMikdash, and we don't want the Beis HaMikdash to have to pay too much. You can get cheap labor during Chol HaMoed because most people are not working since you're not supposed to work Chol HaMoed, so laborers have a hard time finding employment. So they're willing to hire themselves out, supply and demand. They're willing to hire themselves out at a lower price during that period of time. Why are they allowed to work at all? So either, says Tosas, we're talking about laborers that we're talking about laborers that don't have anything to eat, so therefore they have the right to work, or we're talking about the fact that, as Eddie said, since it's for the purpose of a mitzvah, so we would permit it for that reason. So Amar Zvidvi Temer Ramashashia Shma Mina. So obviously, if we're paying, if we want to pay them the cheapest possible price and we're justifying doing it during Chol HaMoed for that reason, it must be that the money is coming from the Trumas Halishka and we don't want to spend more than is absolutely necessary from the temple treasury. Because if the owners are paying, so let them pay. I mean, they shouldn't have had the kilayim growing in their fields in the first place. Let them pay top dollar and not have it done during Chol HaMoed. Whatever it costs, let them pay. How much a kilayim for a bin mixture has to be growing if you have like two different vegetables, two different seeds that are not supposed to be near each other, and you have a field, of let's say a vineyard, and you're not allowed to, have wheat growing in the vineyard or so forth. So how much of the growth is a problem? So like we learned, you have a sa'ah, that's a certain measurement called sa'ah sheyesh ba roba hakav. If you have roba, meaning roba hakav is 1/24 of a sa'ah. So if you have roba, then that would be 1/24 of a sa'ah, or roba hakav is 1/24 of a sa'ah. Okay, fine. There, because you have 6 kavin in a sa'ah, and a rova hakav is 1/24. So if you're rova hakav, so 1/24 growth is a problem. Rova zera. Mimin akeh, from a different species than what is the official species of the field, and you might. So then you have to uproot it. You have to get rid of it. You have to lower it. You might mean, says Rashi says, yamitenu v'yakrenu, that you make it lower, meaning that you cut it off from its growth and that you uproot it. V'hatanya. But don't we have a verse that says that it wasn't just Yimayit, that we would uproot the problematic growths from a different type of a grain or vegetable, but rather the punishment that we would heap upon the owners of fields with kilayim is that we would just declare their fields ownerless altogether. So we say, well, it depends on what point in time we're talking about. Lukasha, kind konim takana, that before the takana, the agents of the Bezdin would just go out and they would uproot the problematic grain seeds and sproutings. Kana akar takana, But after the takana, they didn't uproot it. They just declared the field to be ownerless. The Tanya, the Brisa says, for Rishona, you okrin and mashlich on the behemton. The agents would go out, they would find the problematic kilayim, and the owners would be sitting, in their lounge chairs, on their deck reading the newspaper and say, "This is great. You're uprooting my kilayim and they're feeding it to my animals. Right? You bali batim smechen shtei smachos." And they would had two things they were happy about. Akash and Ashkelon Sadusein. They're for free. Other people are weeding their fields. They don't have to pay anything. And the second thing was that they were feeding their animals. So all of these sinners who were allowing kilayim to go in their fields were just, chuckling away because they were getting the benefit of the bargain. So then they made a takana that instead of feeding the kilayim to the animals, they would just uproot the problematic sprouts, and they would throw them onto the streets. Where Diana used to make on swim some but they were still happy. Okay, they didn't get two benefits; they got one benefit. Shimon Ashken Sadu saying that their fields were being, weeded for free. So Iskinos, that's when they made the final takana that they just would declare the fields to be ownerless entirely. That brings us to a Naya Mishnah of Rabbi Eliezer and Yaakov Omer. Moshkin Esamayim Ilan Le'ilan. It says you can divert water that has gathered underneath a tree from one tree to another tree. Because trees need constant irrigation, so therefore it's considered to be a base of shlochen, that it will be a hefsed if you didn't water them. So we allow for the watering, you can divert the water from one tree to another tree. There's another way of understanding this, that even if there wouldn't be a hefsed, it's not a tircha altogether. The way that Rashi understands is that there's a little bit of a tircha, but we're allowing it because the area where you have trees growing has the status of like a base of shlach, like a field that needs to be irrigated. As long as you don't water the entire field, because the entire field, including places where you don't have trees growing, so that's considered to be, as Rashi says, like a sada base habal, like a field that's able to subsist with rainwater alone. And therefore, it does not justify the tircha during Chol HaMoed. So, if you have seeds that were not watered before Chol HaMoed, so obviously then not considered to be like so urgent that they need water because you didn't feel a need to water them before Chol HaMoed. So Yashkim HaMoed, so you can't water them on Chol HaMoed. The Chachamim say, the Chachamim like Rabbi Meir, that we quoted on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, who allows pretty much everything. He allows even watering a base habal, a field that subsists with rainwater alone. So the Chachamim say it's fine. You can water the entire field, and you can also water the Zraim, the seeds that had not been watered before Chol HaMoed, so they weren't watered before, but you can water them now, no problem. Says the Gemara, I'm Rabbi Yehuda, if you're dealing with this, at which Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said that you're not allowed to water the entire field, that's only if you're not dealing with a very moist field. But if you're dealing with a field which is generally moist, and now it's dried up, so even though this is a field that generally subsists with rainwater, since it's used to being moist, if you're going to allow it to remain dry right now, it's going to be bad for the field. So therefore, even Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov will allow watering of such a field, even though it's a southern base habal. Brisa says like this as well. We said that it's prohibited to water on Chol HaMoed. That's only with respect to the Zraim that you were not accustomed to watering before Chol HaMoed, right? That's so too. But if they were accustomed to being watered, then you can water them at Chol HaMoed. And here it says explicitly what we just said right now. If it was a field, the entire field was a very moist field in general, even though you didn't water it, but it had generally enjoyed a lot of moisture, and now it's dried up, that would also be mutter, because otherwise it's going to suffer a loss. The ein mashkin asada grid b'moed, but you're not allowed in general to water a field that is grid. It's always dry. If it's always dry, so then it doesn't require a special watering, because obviously the field's able to do fine even though it's dry on a regular basis. So the ein mashkin asada grid b'moed. Chachamim, again, here are our Chachamim, that would be Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim matirim b'zer b'zer. They say it's fine, even if it's a sada grid, and even if it's seeds that were not watered, before Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to water them on Chol HaMoed. So Amar Rabina, so Rabina says, now there are two different ways of understanding Rabina, but again, since we don't have a ton of time, we'll give Rashi's explanation. So according to Rashi, Rabina is going on the Shita of the Chachamim, not the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who's the Machmir. It says, according to the Shita of the Chachamim, who are Meko, Shema Mina, if you have a garden patch, okay, even though it's not an irrigation field per se, but nonetheless, it would really benefit from some water. Shari l'tabuse b'chola demoada. You're allowed to not water it completely, like a very rigorous watering, but you would be allowed at least to sprinkle it with water on a chol hamoed. Asada garid my time up. What's the reason that we would allow, according to the Chachamim, we would allow the watering even of a dry field, the apla mashri la karpa, because crops which would come out later will now come out earlier. So akinami, so too with the garden patch, apla mashri la karpa, the crops that would come out later will come out earlier. Tosfos gives an explanation where this works even according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, since you're only doing sprinkling and not full-fledged watering and ayin sham. Tana Rabbanan. So here we have a girsa issue with respect to this particular brisa. Tana Rabbanan, ma bitzin sa de lovin b'shviyas lov alo b'moed. The girsa of the Vilna Gaon is not that you're allowed to sprinkle water on a sedei lovin on a wheat field during the Shemitah year, but you're not allowed to do it on a kol hamoed, but rather you can't do either. Ein ma bitzin sa de lovin b'shviyas v'lo b'moed. We don't allow watering, even sprinkling of a sadeh lavan of a wheat field during the Shemitah year, and we don't allow it at Kol HaMoed either. Tanya, and that seems, since we're going to say that this is going like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that works out better. The Gersa of the Vilna Gaon works out better according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, because that's the general version that we have of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Tanya, but don't we have a brisa that says ma bitzim bein b'moed bein b'shviyas, that you are allowed to water a wheat field, both a Kol HaMoed and the Shemitah year? So Amrafuna lo kasha Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov harabanan lo kasha. The one that's very makel is the Shitas Rabbanan, that's the Shitas Rabbi Meir, and the one who's more machmir, that's the Shitas Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, similar to our Mishnah. So Tanya Idach, another brisa says, "Mabitzin stay loven erev shvius," that you are allowed to water, sprinkle water at least on a wheat field on erev shvius, the 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, kadeshietzu Yerakov b'shvius, so that there you will enable the vegetables to grow during the Shemitah year. Remember, if you did the planting on Erev Shvius, you don't have a nisr spichin on the Shemitah year. So that could be a consideration over here. Below Ode, not only that, since they love and b'shvius, but you also are allowed to water a wheat field on the Shemitah year itself. You're allowed to at least sprinkle water, so that you will have a vegetation that's going to grow the year after Shemitah. The one thing you're not allowed to do, at least according to Rashi, is last Rashi says about lo yashke b'shvius kedei sheyetzu b'shvius, but you're not allowed to water the field on the Shemitah year in order to yield crops on the Shemitah year itself. It would have to be either you're watering on the 6th year in order for vegetation to grow the 7th year, or you're watering on the Shemitah year in order for the vegetation to grow the following year. Those are the only things that we would allow. Next Mishnah, Naya Mishnah says, "Sardinus ishus." You're allowed to trap the ishos. What are ishos? It's a type of rodent. Okay, as we will see in the Gemara, it seems to be like a mole, either a mole or Tosfos brings an opinion, a weasel. Sounds like a mole from the Gemara. And you're allowed to trap the mice. Okay, Mistei Ilan. According to the Tanakama over here, you'll be allowed to trap them in a wheat field and in a field of trees and orchard, and also a wheat field where they don't do as much damage, but nonetheless, you're still allowed to do it in the normal fashion, both in Chol HaMoed and in the and during the Shemitah year, even though it's a tikkun for the Sadeh, but because otherwise, I'm sorry. In your house for sure. And otherwise, it would cause a hefsek. The Chachamim say if it's a steilan where they would do a lot of damage because these rodents are going to eat away, all your fruits or whatever. So then you can trap them in the normal fashion. If it's just a grain field, shelo kedarko, then you'd have to do it in an irregular fashion. Makrinis appears to b'moed, and a chol hamoed, if there's a fence that came down, then you're allowed to fix the fence that got breached. Uvashvias bona kedak. In the Shemitah year, if you have a fence around your field, you can even, or you didn't have a fence, you can even build a fence in the first place, because Shvius, you're allowed to work at Shvius, you're just not allowed to do avodas hasadeh. There are certain types of labors in the actual planting of one's field that one can't do in the Shemitah year, but building a fence is not a problem for the Shemitah year. Says the Gemara, my ishus, what are these strange rodents that we call ishus? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Birya she'en la einayim. It's a creature that doesn't have eyes. Sounds like a mole. So Amar Rav bar Yishma v'Yitema Rav Yemen b'Shami Maikra. What's the pasuk where we learn this? Because the pasuk says it's talking about terrible. I'm sorry. What? Well, they have very small eyes, and we consider them to be basically, blind. So Maikra, what's the pasuk that indicates this? So it says Kimo that this would be a description of a creature that we call Ishus, because it says in some type of a curse that's being given out by the Navi I'm sorry, that's being described by David HaMelech, is saying what's going to happen to bad people. So it says that it's going to be the calamity that will occur is Kimo, they will be destroyed. Kimo Shablu Temis Yaloch, like a snail that melts as it slithers along. Nafal Ashes the Baal Chazo, and like Nepel, excuse me, Nepel Ashes Baal Chazo, and like the stillborn of a woman that never gets to see the light of day. So we see the word Eshes is used here. It means a wife, but it's used in the context of someone who doesn't see the light of day. So we see from here that Ishus could be a type of rodent that Baal Chazo that doesn't see Baal Chazo Shemesh, that doesn't see the light of day. So that would be some sort of a source, even though the literal translation of the word is talking about a stillborn child, but that would be a source that would ascribe the word Eshes to a type of rodent that's not able to see. Tanam Abban and Southern is the Ishus. So what did we say? That you're allowed to trap the Ishus, the moles, Vesachabarim, and the mice, Mistei Alovin and Mistei Ilan Kedarko, according to, this is consistent with the Tanakama of our Mishnah, that you would be allowed to trap both in a field of trees and in a grain field in the normal fashion. And you also can destroy the ant holes. You can destroy the ant holes in order, presumably, to get rid of the ants, right? That makes sense. Okay, then Macharivin. How would you destroy ant holes? So Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, if you want to know how to do it, advice from a good exterminator, maybe off of Mechorzeh and no saying the Tochorzeh. You take the dirt from one hole and you exchange it with the dirt from a different hole. So when the ants will go into their regular hole, they'll smell like a different sort of smell. They'll get all disoriented and they'll strangle each other. So Amar Yemen Bashalmi and Mishmei Abaye, that's only if the two ant holes are very far away from each other. That's only if they're very far away from each other, because otherwise the ants are already familiar with the smell of the dirt in the other ant hole. Betray Ibri Nara. The ant holes have to be on different sides of the river. I remember we once had raccoons, and we had these raccoon trappers that came to our houses when we lived in Riverdale, and they trapped the raccoons, and they took the raccoons like the other side of the river. Because they said if they're going to stay on this side of the Hudson, they'll come back because they're familiar with the surroundings.
I captured it, but he said to drive it across the canal away and release it farther away. So we did it by the forest preserve, by Old Orchard. We did it there, and that was really
okay. But we didn't have to actually drive the raccoons ourselves. Somehow they were nice enough to drive the raccoons for us. Okay, yeah. So who's the kite betray Ibra Denara? Who the Lake of Gishra? And also there can't be a bridge. There can't be a bridge between the two rivers, because then they'll just cross over on the bridge. And also they'll be familiar, but based on crossing over on the bridge with the smell of the other anvil. With the Lake of Gamla, and there can't even be a plank, because even if it's not a full-fledged bridge, but a plank, so they don't care. It doesn't have to be like a fancy bridge from their perspective. With the Lake of Mitzvah, and it can't even be like, a tiny little board that has ropes that you hold on to on the side. Is anything that would enable them to cross, so then they'd be familiar with the smell. Ad kama, until how far the Chorei Nemalim have to be that if you have a river between them and you don't have a bridge or anything, that they would not be familiar. So ad parsa, it has to be parse, it has to be 4 mil, approximately 4 kilometers away. Okay, good. Stop here. Okay. Some say that